Hello, everyone, and welcome to another LongX Fireside Chat. Here at LongX, we aim to expand access to longevity education and learning opportunities globally, ensuring that the future contributors to the aging field come from the best of every country, regardless of your access to local opportunities. We do this through our flagship project, the Explore Fellowship Program, which provides access to our longevity primer course and career development opportunities with our various industry partners. And outside of the Explore program, we also host this series of fireside chats with interesting and knowledgeable people from across the field who we think the next generation might like to hear from. And in this case, likely already have heard from. Finally, through our series of educational articles. It's our honor to host Eleanor Sheekey. Eleanor is currently a postdoctoral researcher in Dr. Fujiwara's lab in RIKEN, Japan, investigating skin extracellular matrices and aging, after previously completing her PhD at the Cancer Research UK Cambridge Institute, investigating one of the coolest proteins, P53. More famously, she's the creator of the Sheekey Science Show, where she covers the latest developments in aging research and science with thoughtful whiteboard-styled animations. Many of us at LongX, who follow myself included, use the Sheekey Science Show as a guide to some of the more important concepts in the field, and with over 40k subscribers, it's fair to say that we're far from alone. We'll keep about 25 minutes or so at the end for a Q&A, so if anyone has a question, feel free to ask that then, or you can put it in the chat and DM it to me, and I'll ask it on your behalf at the end. Thanks for joining us, Eleanor, and please take it away.
Thank you, no problem, and thank you for that really kind introduction. So I have just this short presentation to sort of give, I guess, a bit more detail to my background and interest in science communication, and then happy to, take any questions afterwards.
Sounds good.
So this is when I have to do the embarrassing thing and check if my slides are being shared.
There we go. Yep, I can see. Yeah, it's not in presentation mode, but I can see PowerPoint. Yep.
And you're seeing the presenter mode, right? Or not?
I'm seeing it with the notes on the side.
Okay. Is it
There
good
we
now?
go. Yeah, full screen.
Excellent. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining today. Hopefully this, it's early morning for me, so hopefully it'll be nice and casual. As you may know, I have a lot of interest in longevity, but also do a lot of science communication. But before I sort of get to that, I thought I have to do the sort of embarrassing thing and tell you a bit about myself. And it always feels like I'm doing some sort of like dating profile, so apologies for the animations. But I never realized I wanted to be a scientist when I was younger. I actually, believe it or not, wanted to be a magician. And there is embarrassing childhood pictures of me dressed up as a magician. But I guess in many ways, being a scientist is also kind of like being a magician, but slightly different, of course. And I think there is obviously some magic to biology, and it is such a fascinating process that we're trying to understand. All of that is to say that I think from a young age, I have always had a passion about asking the big questions. And naturally, I think that aligns well with being a scientist. And so obviously being a scientist is a very serious profession, but at the same time, I do like to think I have a good sense of humor and also like to have fun with my science. And I think that's also reflected somewhat in my science communication. And just as we've already discussed my interest in playing football, I also am quite athletic and like to just keep myself busy, perhaps too busy sometimes, but for me, it gives me more of a fulfilling life. But yeah, ultimately, I want to be able to contribute to science and to be a good role model for others. A bit of background about my more academic side of things. I went to school, I'm from the UK, and then went to Cambridge to do biochemistry. And then after that, as already has been explained, I did my PhD with Masashi Narita's lab in the Cancer Research UK Centre, where I focused on cellular senescence and P53. And then during that, I had this awesome opportunity to spend a summer in Osaka University in Japan. And I think that really was kind of one of the opportunities that made me think that this could be somewhere I want to live long term. And so now I am, well, after a short stay in a separate lab in the biochemistry department back in Cambridge, I then found a postdoc position here at the RIKEN Institute in Kobe, Japan. And so far I've been having a great time. And as we've discussed, my futsal playing. But alongside my academic side of things, I've always had this passion for science communication. And it was really during my undergrad days that I started initially working on a website called Journal of Young Investigators, which, as far as I'm aware, is still going. I'm not sure. But essentially, you were sort of given topics that you could talk about, and then you would work with an editor and craft a sort of journalistic piece to summarize research papers. And then after doing that for a few years, I switched from being a journalist to an editor. And that also gave me some early experience about how to actually craft effective science communication pieces. But I think I found it too limiting. So after that, I decided to create my own blog, which I then subsequently turned into the YouTube channel, which you may be familiar with. So it really did, around maybe 2017, start with some blogs. And apologies, this literally is what my first blog was. It was science-based, obviously. But yeah, my humor, I think, always has been just my unique way of trying to make science more interesting and educational at the same time. But since then, I guess I can sort of summarize my YouTube videos into two sort of categories. Either I try to explain research papers, so kind of like journal club style, or it's also been such a blessing to be able to actually speak with researchers themselves into the more long form interviews. And from that, there's been many rewarding aspects about doing science communication. One, of course, being invited to do events like this, but just to be able to network and collaborate with people from all over the world. It really is like one of the things I never expected initially going into science communication. And then, yeah, I've had the opportunity to present at different conferences at schools. And I think it really emphasizes how much, as a scientist, I do like science communication. And I think as much as I love the hands-on science, it's also so important to find effective ways to communicate that science to a wider audience. So although I still don't think I'm the best person at science communication, the only way you can get better is by practice. And so being able to do events like this as well helps to improve my own confidence for not only presenting in scientific settings, but also in non-scientific settings. So I thought I'd give a little bit of advice, albeit it's biased and it's my personal experience, but how exactly do you go about making or being in the science communication space? What exactly is my process that I go through from some initial idea to making a final video? And I guess there is no easy answer, but I try to sort of break it down into three different sections. So the first obviously does require some thinking. You have to not just think about what topics you're personally interested, but who are you making these videos for? What is the sort of scientific level that you're trying to do this for? As how the vocabulary you use and how you go about explaining it will very much depend on who you're trying to target. And then the topic, for me, I've always tried to make sure I align my interest in the science communication with my personal interests, as there's then this intrinsic motivation to actually create the content. But also depends on the setting. You have to think about what your audience is wanting to learn from you. And so I realized I haven't actually made a YouTube video for over a month now, and I feel like an imposter talking about science communication. But I have to say, I do have many, many ideas of things I want to talk about. It's just, again, trying to find the right time to do it. But that's just, at least in the longevity space, a point to say that there is actually plenty of things you can be talking about. I think like I will have endless number of topics I could talk about in longevity. And then obviously after you've thought about what you're going to talk about, you then have to actually make the content. Now, I've just listed a few things here that I sort of use, but I think the barrier to entry is even easier now perhaps than it was previously because of so many AI, apologies, AI tools and everything that you can use to help streamline your process. I think there really is quite a low barrier to entry, and it doesn't have to be expensive to actually be a science communicator. And then in terms of delivery, I have a sort of biased knowledge of YouTube, but obviously there are also many platforms that you can use, and how exactly you want to distribute your content on different social media platforms, you'll have to sort of adjust your video format or length, etc., to be able to match and meet the desired platform. There are, of course, many challenges of being a science communicator, feeling like an imposter. It takes a lot of hard work. Sometimes I feel responsible, and sometimes I do question, have I made less content more recently? Because as I get older myself, I become more senior in the scientific academic space. And therefore, perhaps I have to be more careful about how exactly I'm presenting myself online. Of course, you may get negative comments. Fortunately, this hasn't happened so much with me. And I think this is just irrespective of science communication, just a problem that people have. At least I do anyway. But more seriously, there is some important challenges to overcome, and that's trying to, especially in the scientific space, trying to be exciting and engaging, but without doing it in a way that causes clickbait or causes hype. And I read this book maybe a few years back now, and I really liked the way that it sort of classifies misinformation and disinformation, both of which obviously are bad to have in a video. But I think it's, everyone makes mistakes, but it's important to try and be as accurate and honest with your audience as possible. And I think having that authenticity from the start will, in the long term, be a better way for you to approach it, especially as a scientist. And it does require consistency. This is, I think, the first year of my YouTube presence, which it actually doesn't look that bad. But then if I sort of do a more broad perspective, it really kind of is nothing compared to how exactly my channel grew over time. To be fair, my channel right now probably looks a bit more like this, but yeah, it's just a journey. And I think that, again, you have to find the right motivation for doing the science communication. For me as well, I always think it was somewhat a selfish thing that for me, making the videos or trying to explain it in my own words was a way to help me understand the topic better. And it just so happened to also help a much broader audience. So consistency is key. And yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. Believe it or not, this was the first ever sketch of what I hoped my YouTube little logo to look like. And as you can all tell, it looks terrifying. But actually, I think it's kind of charming. But it did, fortunately, it did improve over time. But I think you shouldn't worry too much about the little details. I think the one thing that the one thing that you should aim for it to be as accurate as possible really is the information itself. How exactly you deliver that will be crafted over time as you get more confident in your own abilities. So yeah, ultimate first steps, just brainstorm ideas. You have to make mistakes to be able to learn from them. So make mistakes. As I said, there's many tools available now to be able to get into this science communication space. And really, there is still more consumers than creators. So again, it's something that we still need, especially in the longevity space. And yeah, just be authentic and be yourself. And so yeah, for my personal background, this is kind of how I hope my YouTube content goes. But the more I learn about longevity, the bigger this sort of sphere gets, and it's now got a little bit chaotic, perhaps not this chaotic, but there is many things I want to be able to talk about. And so this was one case recently where I tried to align my current reading to researching and being able to speak with researchers. So there is ways to make it compatible. And so as I mentioned, I've just as of this summer moved to Japan. And so again, I think part of the reason my communication has maybe lacked a little bit is I have other priorities. But I think what this has also pointed out to me is how I could maybe use the fact that I'm trying to learn Japanese to my advantage, and at some point perhaps even make a few videos in Japanese. But at least right now, I don't think my ability is quite there. But then that would go against my own advice saying that it doesn't have to be perfect. So maybe I should try. I just remember that really the science communication space is non-zero sum, where we're not competing against each other. We're here to help improve communication and longevity. So we really should be cooperating and working together. These are just some other unsolicited bits of advice that I have on a slide. But ultimately, I think, yeah, trying is the most important thing, and it hopefully would get better over time. And my favorite slide is this one, that if you ever do feel a bit sad, remember that at some point we were just a little single cell. I don't know why that gives me some comfort, but it just kind of is just amazing that we're even existing. So hopefully that also gives you some motivation. So yeah, thank you for indulging me in my short presentation. Happy to take any questions.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much, or arigato. So I will happily take questions in the chat if anyone has any. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and start asking a few of my own. I just want to say, by the way, thank you for doing a service in introducing more of the world to British humor through your videos.
Excellent.
I always love someone else who can evangelize with, something like Top Gear joke from time to time, something like that. Um, so okay, well, how about we'll start with this one. You get the opportunity to, especially now with your long form content, you get an opportunity to speak to a lot of really cool people. A lot of people I myself would love to speak to. So when you have a limited amount of time out of these people's day and you have to show the world, the most important things that you can with that time, how, Eleanor, do I ask you a good question?
Oh.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hard one.
It was also going to depend on who you're talking to. Uh I think you have to be informed about who you're talking to in the first place, know exactly their research question. And I think it's always good to get them make sure that it's beneficial for them to be speaking with you. So the questions you ask them have to make them think about new ideas that maybe they've not thought about because you're coming from a completely different perspective to their own. And so I think some of the most interesting conversations I've had have been when I've because my maybe broad more naive interest has said something that then led down to a sort of new pathway that maybe they hadn't thought about before. So then it's both exciting for me to talk about it, but also beneficial for them to talk about it.
Yeah, there's a dual benefit there to both parties, and also, potentially could spark ideas in the audience as well. Yeah, I like that. Um, so if you had to link someone one paper to spark an interest in skin ECMs, if you had one shot, didn't know anything about the person, which one, which one would you go for?
Yeah, that's actually a really difficult question. I mean, I'd like to say if we fast forward a few years, perhaps mine, but no, I don't think so. I think there's some really interesting studies done maybe in the 60s and 70s about collagen, which isn't just in the skin, obviously across the body, but it's used the skin as an example. And I think the title was something like The Aging of Collagen. And I think it's very biochemistry, so maybe that would put many people off, to be fair. But there is obviously many. I'd probably guide them to a review article of some sort. There was a nice review article in the ECM that came out this summer in Nature Reviews, one of them, that I would highly recommend because the extracellular matrix, the ECM, I think is something that people sort of vaguely use this term, but we actually really barely understand it. And when you think about all of our cells are interacting with this matrix around them, it's not just between other cells. I think it's kind of opening up Pandora's box a little bit. And so I think hopefully it'd be very easy to engage people, but I'd have to do it in a way that it doesn't also massively overwhelm them.
Yeah, thanks for the very good answer there. Um, yeah, I mean, it'd be very hard for you to suggest specific papers there, but I think, yeah, review articles, especially for getting a like basic kind of yeah, for getting a basic interest. There's always the question of do you go for the original papers or do you go for like the review articles? I tend to go for one of those two when I'm trying to get into a new field. I think it depends, especially on how the field has evolved from
Oh,
when
exactly.
it,
Yeah.
yeah, from when it originally came about. With older
So
fields, especially, the original papers maybe are quite a far cry from where the field has become.
that's true. Yeah, I think sometimes, I mean, I am someone who maybe not so much now, but when I was in Cambridge, had access to so many old books that often I think starting with review articles then sort of leads you down these rabbit holes to older papers. And sometimes they have interesting ideas that perhaps they couldn't test then, but we can test now. So I think starting with a good review article is not a bad thing to do because it then you would hope has the references that you then need to go for further detailed research.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. So, you answered quite a few of these actually, during your
Oh,
talk. So one of them that
excellent.
I was going to ask about actually was, yeah, like the basic preparation for getting into science communication, which you covered with very succinctly with a nice slide there. And I did have one on how your animation style originated, which you did a very good job of showing there. I was smiling when I saw that. I'm very glad you showed that. So the second part to that question that I was going to ask is what was the feedback like that you got on your art style?
Oh, interesting. So, to be fair, I'd say most of the comments haven't necessarily been focused on the actual art style. I think, if anything, for context, I know I just gave a presentation, but I really hate presentations. And so that was initially the idea for making the channel, was to do a presentation-based approach, just record my PowerPoint screen. But for whatever reason, I tried for about a year and I didn't make any videos because I just didn't like it. And so it was, at the same time, I was still doing the blog pieces and was drawing these like quite elaborate diagrams to go with them. And then I just had the idea to sort of record as I was drawing it. And I think that I wasn't the first person to do that. In fact, there are some sort of like whiteboard style videos on YouTube where it's kind of like preset pieces that they have and some like hand comes across it. And I think I always found them engaging because you're sort of following where the hand's going. And so I think, if anything, that's the positive feedback I've had is, albeit my diagrams aren't necessarily the tidiest, but because you're sort of following my hand, it's kind of easy to follow even quite complex topics because I'm trying to literally guide them through it like a sort of, well, like a actual class.
Thanks. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite interesting when you're how presentation can kind of be something that you feel like you have to do to be effective, but maybe it's not like your first choice. I found, so for a bit of context on my own experience with this, I went into college as opposed to university. And I found that in college, I was made to do far more presentations. And so when it came to university, even though I didn't really consider myself a presentation person, everybody wanted me in their team for presentations just because that was like where the environment that I had come from caused me to kind of have my skills. And we're getting some great questions in here. I will read these out for the purpose of the recording. So first one from Paolo. From your perspective, what trends do you see developing in aging/longevity? A while ago, it was senolytics and then reprogramming. Now,
A good question. So I still think that my background's in senescence, so I'm biased to say that I still think there is we'll see a resurgence and more interest in senolytics at some point. And of course, with the reprogramming, I don't think it's sort of died down a little bit. I think because there was a lot of companies starting at the same time. But I do think we'll see some more interest come back to that. I'd like to think that we are seeing a more trend to thinking beyond the cell. And obviously again, I'm biased because I'm doing the ECM studies, so the interaction of the cells with their larger environment, as opposed to just focusing on trying to reprogram one individual cell. But I think the other thing that aligns with is there does seem to be more interest in sort of replacement aging or regenerative medicine, which again was sort of kickstarted a while back in terms of even linking it with the original Yamanaka papers and reprogramming. But also you can go from those stem cells and you want to not just create a fibroblast from a different cell type, but you want to recreate the whole tissue. And I think that tissue mechanics requires an understanding of not just the cells, but the environment around it. And so, yeah, I think replacement aging, which I guess somewhat maybe links to the sort of cryogenic sort of thing, is something that we're seeing more interest in at the moment. But I think the longevity space is so massive at the moment. I haven't noticed any particular trends, and maybe, dare I say it, am I the trendsetter and I just not made any videos to to push any direction? But no, I'm not entirely sure. I think that it seems unclear what the latest sort of interest is.
hmm. Another question here that's kind of related, perhaps, is what's a longevity topic that you are personally most passionate about and why? Could be the
Oh,
next big topic. Who knows?
so I think I do spend a lot of time not just thinking about senescent cells, but sort of like aged cells, like what actually is an aged cell. And so I think, I mean, the definition of senescent cells is complicated, and I think that there are some fundamental questions in that space that we still need to understand, at least from the basic biology side of things. Otherwise, I still have an interest in reproductive aging, which fortunately I think we are now having more funding and interest going that direction. I know personally my own research hasn't taken me there yet, but it is something that I am still trying to read about.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same boat there. Yeah. Um, so here's a big one from Sufal. Uh, Ah, I personally think that in aging, we need a lot more content and creators like yourself, Eleanor, as it's a great way to bring attention and popularity. Most opinions I've heard are from a non-aging person seems to come from drastic and headliney news like Brian. What do you think is currently stopping people from creating more content like your own?
It's difficult. It's a matter of time commitments and it yeah requires a. I want to say I think sometimes how did I find the time to do it, and I'm not entirely sure, but you have to combine that motivation with like just doing it. And I feel bad. I think yeah, I actively want to make more content, and I think I have my own sort of hurdle sometimes, which I can then relate to, which is, or maybe they won't be good enough, maybe they're not researched enough. But as I basically just disproving my own advice. I should listen to myself more. But yeah, I think it does require a lot of work, and I think you have to know that upfront. But you don't have to make content every day. Like, I mean, in many ways, my approach now was to sort of make less content, but to make content that I'm very proud of or that I know has been well researched. So there is no particular rush. And I think that one amazing video that was created in the space of a year could be way more meaningful than, one a week, sort of short, sort of clickbaity videos. So see the long-term vision, not the short-term vision.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. Some of your videos I think will be quite timeless, which, maybe a lower quality video created with a more shorter kind of time span and time frame, and maybe would have done better in the moment, I don't think will last in the same way that some of yours will. Um, what are some terms in aging that you think the field should avoid?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I think I've never really been a fan of the phrase anti-aging, but then I also sometimes it's the one that people understand most. Like in fact, in Japan, sometimes it's easier to say anti-aging than longevity purely for a communication point of view. Um, so I think maybe the way we should think about that question isn't let's say anti-aging is the wrong thing to say, but let's reframe how we think about anti-aging and not have people think about the sort of cosmetics, just purely cosmetic side of things, and give them a better explanation about what we mean by that.
I agree. I think that it's a term which unfortunately has like had some negative connotations at times, but I think it is the simplest term. And yeah, perhaps there is value in that. And especially you can see in other countries that maybe it doesn't have the same negative connotations because it hasn't been associated with the same things there. Um, Another question from Paula. Uh, which video that you made gave you the most satisfaction and why? And which one was the hardest to make?
Ooh. Interesting. Both those questions are quite difficult purely for the fact I've just made so many videos. Um, Video I'm most satisfied with. I think some of my early interviews, obviously when I first, was showing myself, not just my sort of hiding behind a screen, I was very satisfied when I was able to have these like long, detailed conversations with researchers. But sometimes I think that they're actually easier for me to make than doing the sort of actual animation style videos. I think there's been a couple of like quite in-depth, not sort of journal clubs, but sort of like topic deep dives, like in senescence that I know I spent a lot of time doing. And in fact, actually now I think about it, there's one video I made about 3 ways about rejuvenation. I just remember I spent a lot of time doing the sort of learning animation techniques for that video. And also I think, yeah, it brought together a lot of my terrible humor, terrible animations, but also some good longevity content on rejuvenation. And I remember that video doing quite well. And it was one that did well, but I knew I'd spent a lot of time making the video. So I was very satisfied that it worked. And there's been some times when I spend a lot of time making a video, maybe no one watches it, which is sad. Or there's some times when I don't spend much time making one and it gets too many views and I feel bad. So it's complicated, but that one does sort of stand out. And then I think they're all somewhat hard to make. I think sometimes the more sensitive topics, like when I have spoken about reproduction or fertility decline, I have to sort of think about how to phrase things correctly, not to be over exaggerating or too promising for some of these therapies when they are still very premature. So I think that the hard part isn't just the actual making the content, but trying to get that right balance in terms of the communication.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, I agree. As someone who also sometimes has to talk about reproductive aging, you have to be very sensitive about some topics like this, especially where there are people who right now could really be benefiting from these therapies. And yeah, you have to be sensitive about that. Got a great question here from Muhammad Ali that I was also wondering myself. Um, This might be a little stupid or redundant. If it is stupid or redundant, it was for me too. But do you have a favorite definition of how you define what exactly aging is, molecularly or biologically? And if you do, is there any reason you picked these specific biomarkers over the others?
I'm a simple person, so I like simple definitions. So for me, I do think that aging, I either describe it as loss of homeostasis or loss of function. Because homeostasis and function are both quite complex phrases, like words in themselves, but they explain a lot. And I think for me, if I should elaborate a little bit, loss of function can extend not just from an individual cell doing the wrong function, expressing the wrong genes, but to a tissue level and the tissues malfunctioning, to organ system level malfunction. So for me, I think aging as loss of function covers many grounds. And then I guess along with that, homeostasis is all about trying to restore balance or restore function in many ways, or responding to your environment in the correct way. So the loss of homeostasis with aging as well is also a way I like to think about it. Now, in many ways, both those definitions, loss of function, loss of homeostasis, are also terms that you could probably apply to any specific disease. So again, it comes into the more interesting, what really sets aging apart from different diseases. And so I don't know if that answered your question, but they seem too simple to be able to explain aging, and I agree with that. But for me, I think we do not have enough information to be more detailed. Does that answer your question?
Answers mine. I'll let Mohammed speak for himself, but I would hope so. There we go. Indeed, it does.
Yeah, it does, Eleanor.
Thank you.
Thanks for the great question, Mohammed. So I'll ask one of my own now. You said that listening to feedback is quite important. What was the most useful feedback that you've gotten so far in your career?
Ooh. Oh, my career. um,
I'll include YouTube there for the career. Anything so far? Anything so far?
I think so. It's not necessarily feedback, but I think some feedback comes from you actually asking someone initially. Also, sometimes you get feedback without wanting it, sort of thing. Like on YouTube, someone could write a comment, and I didn't necessarily ask them to write a comment. But you can also actually speak with people and say, oh, what did you think about this? And get personal feedback. So I think feedback, is always beneficial because, again, it points out your mistakes or ways that you can improve and get better. So I think it can be proactive that you ask people that you're working with, colleagues that are trying to train you, oh, how can I improve? What are your tips? That feedback actually covers many things. So I think that's kind of what I meant by use feedback to advantage. But there's many ways in which you can get feedback. It's like an optimization strategy. So the feedback, there's no one bit of feedback I could say was the most beneficial. I think my advice would be to just, because everyone's unique in their own sort of ambitions and goals anyway, that your feedback's going to be unique to yourself. So my feedback is to ask people for feedback, which I think just completely misinterprets your question, but
No, I think it's still very insightful regardless. So no, I appreciate it. And yeah, I was thinking of feedback purely in terms of like comments that you had gotten, but no, that I was thinking about it in a far too narrow space. I appreciate. I thank you. Thank you there for your feedback on my definition of feedback. Um, so, this is one that you kind of touched on a little earlier, how you were saying that you wanted to make more videos, but how do you think about work-life balance, being that you essentially have two roles within the longevity space as both a researcher and as a communicator?
So I still haven't found the right balance per se, and I think that, and I've heard other people talk about this, how sometimes certain chapters of your life require different needs from you. And I think just the combination of when I started YouTube and it being the sort of lockdown in the UK and social interaction suddenly becoming quite minimal, and me being early stage of my PhD when I was reading a lot of papers, that sort of unique combination really enabled me to get going with the YouTube content creation. And I suppose on from that, trying to work out what topic I wanted to pursue for my later academic interests also meant I was reading a lot and trying to sort of put that into videos. Whereas now that I've sort of maybe worked out, at least for the next 5 or so years, what my research project will be, I don't have to proactively read too much at the moment, but also I have additional challenges, which is, moving country, trying to learn a new language and trying to make new friends here, which actually requires me to spend a lot of time trying to do extracurricular activities and learning languages as opposed to just purely science. But I think, there will be a wave come back, and maybe again I come back and make a load of videos just because I feel the urge to do it and because I want to do it. And it's just like my life just takes me in different waves at different times. And so I don't want to tell myself that I should be working harder than I am. It's just a natural progression of how things are for me right now.
Yeah, I can absolutely relate. And also, I have a similar kind of retinue of things that I wish to learn, and I'm learning Korean for research reasons right now, so I can relate. There's always one thing that you feel like you should be putting more time into that you're maybe not, but then doing so would perhaps make you neglect other areas where you have, responsibilities that you really should be keeping on top of. Paolo had a question here that I also was wondering about. What's your first impressions of working with Japanese scientists? Do they have a different way of approaching problems to in the UK?
Many people have asked me this question. So firstly, I know I only showed maybe about 4 labs on my presentation, but due to summer projects, I've actually worked in maybe 9 or so different labs. Apologies, the sun has found its way into my bedroom. So I think every lab I've worked in has been slightly different. And so I've now worked, I guess, in 2 different Japanese labs, and even in that one was very much academic, university-based lab, and one is now at an institute. And even that difference, depending on the funding of the lab, the size of the lab, the ratio of like postdocs to PhDs to undergrads can always have an impact. So I don't think it's necessarily per se impression of Japanese scientists, but perhaps more reflection of just their culture in general. And obviously it can be I'm obviously generalizing here, be a bit more reserved and like it can be more difficult to sort of just get started, partly because of their personality nature, but also because of the language barrier, which is also why I am trying to proactively learn Japanese. But I think if anything, everyone I've met so far has been super kind and friendly, and like if I ask for help, they're more than willing to help me. And so it's been a very positive, like hands down, definitely positive experience interacting and working with them. And if anything, one thing that stands out for them as well was their patience and their attention to detail, which perhaps for my more British sort of chilled out, relaxed style, it's actually for me a good lesson to have this attention to detail and really planning to improve the quality of my research. So I think there's a lot I can learn from them. And obviously I hope to improve my communication myself so that I can also improve the learning both ways.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a really good nuanced answer there. I appreciate that one a lot. And I've noticed similar things in the limited interactions that I have had with the Japanese science community. So I'm conscious that you will have to go soon, so I will begin to wrap things up. We maybe have time for one more question from chat, but there's one question that we like to kind of finish with, ask everyone. Um, if someone was just beginning their longevity career now and they were inspired by your talk today to follow in your footsteps, what would you suggest that they do first?
Oh, um, it really depends on who it was. I think because biology, it depends if they have a sort of biology background. Because for me, naturally, my step into longevity really came from a curiosity perspective. I was a biologist learning about biochemistry and different diseases. It wasn't until I had a sort of essay assignment that talked about longevity or like being able to manipulate lifespan that I then came across all these papers about genetic studies that, doubled the lifespan. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize this was even possible. And so really it was the sort of curiosity that got me into it and has taken me to this place right now. So I think if you have any slight curiosity in it, you're already going to go quite far, in my opinion. So I think just start, well, you could start with some of my videos, of course, but there's a lot of good resources online if you want to learn more about longevity. But I think it really depends as well about how much initial sort of biology background you've got and what aspect of the longevity you want to be involved in, purely as a researcher, as a communicator, or from a sort of cheerleader perspective or the funding side of things. There's many different ways you can be involved in longevity. So enjoy the journey. That's all I can really say.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, it can be a difficult question and it can depend on the person. Some people have quite clear answers to that actually. It depends on kind of, I think, the person I'm asking as well, how forceful they are with what they believe people should do. And I think, yeah, you have quite a good understanding of how different people can be in terms of their approaches to longevity and where they come from. We've got, I think, one time for maybe one more question very quickly at the end, hopefully. What is the position of Japanese people with respect to longevity? Do they wish radical life extension more than Westerners? Question from Paolo there. Um,
I don't think I've been able to really bridge, like it has been too soon for me to really have those sort of too detailed conversations with many people. The one thing that does become apparent, maybe it's just my location here in Japan compared to Cambridge, which was very student city, is that at least the population change, like the demographic change really is quite apparent here. I mean, they all seem very healthy and energetic, which is obviously a very good and exciting thing. I think that the current landscape is shifting here as well, and that initially aging itself wasn't really thought about as a topic, but now so a lot more labs or interest is going that direction. So I do think that they are in alignment with how Westerners are thinking. Perhaps they are a bit behind, but there are some reasons why I'm also here trying to make a difference. So hopefully we can push the longevity space out here as well.
Thanks, Eleanor.
yeah, thanks again from me as well. So I think we will wrap things up here. I wouldn't want to make you late by any account. So I will stop the recording and thank you very much, Eleanor, for coming along and talking to us.